So this video I'm going to talk about sleep in triangle strategy. So sleep is a condition that you can apply to enemies and that some enemies can apply to you that causes an affected unit to essentially pass 2 turns, and if they get hit, they will wake up. So it's kind of like a light or temporary shutdown. It generally lasts for 2 turns. The only exception to this is Jens, who can upgrade his slumber strike to last for 3 turns. But aside from that, everyone has a 2-turn sleep. The procrate on sleep is 60% against an enemy. So you have a 60% chance to put an enemy to sleep for 2 turns or 3 turns on Jens with an upgrade. So let's check this out really quick. So is sleep good? I would say it's like okay. It's not one of the best shutdowns, but in some situations it can be good. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move everyone up, and I'll just show everyone's proc rates on these 2 spear dudes. This is like the best test map, to be honest, because everything's level 50. There's just 2 enemies, so it's not too crazy. Alright, so here's what we can do. I'm going to in tandem Anna. So I'm just going to show the proc rate, and then I'll show the effect. So alright, so we'll have Rudolph use Slumber Shot. So you can see here, 60% chance to sleep. In this case, it triggered. It looks like Anna won't be able to put a guy to sleep unless we light wave, so let's do that. Just light wave her over here. And you can see here her slumber stab, also a 60% chance to sleep, so let's see if this procs. So in this case it didn't, so we'll just have her retreat. And then Lionel's sleep is actually part of Endless Speech. So if you look at Endless Speech, lower the speed of all enemies, have a chance to silence and put them to sleep. So you can see here there's 2 separate triggers. There's a sleep. There's like a roll for the sleep and a roll for the silence. And by roll, I mean like a roll of the dice. So it basically checks. It'll try to put them to sleep, and then if that passes or fails, then it'll check to silence. It'll do both, regardless of if it passes or fails. It just does one and then does the other. It's not a 60% chance for both. It's individual. So sometimes you get both, sometimes you get one, sometimes you don't get any of them. But you can see here, he can sleep or silence simultaneously. I would say silence is a little bit stronger than sleep, but sleep can be useful. If you AoE sleep a bunch of enemies at range, you can reposition your entire team and effectively shut them down with sleep. So it can be useful at range. I would say it's better at range than at close, because especially like if you have green AI units, they'll just like smack things. They don't really care. Okay, so Lionel, we'll just move him here. And then we have Jens, who's similar to everyone else, 60% chance. So the nice thing about sleep is at least it is always consistent, like a 60% chance across the board, which is decent. And all of these abilities have like secondary effects, like in the case of Slumber Strike and Slumber Stab and Slumber Shot, like they're all called Slumber. They all do good damage and then put to sleep. So even if it doesn't put the enemy to sleep, it still does damage. The only case this isn't true is Endless Speech, but Endless Speech can be used at range, hits up to 5 targets, and has a decent chance to silence, and will always reduce speed. So even if it completely misses all 5 targets, it'll still reduce their speed, so it still does something. So it's generally a pretty good ability. And I'm going to show smacking this guy, it'll wake him right up. So as soon as an enemy takes damage from a hit, it'll wake them up. As far as I know, nothing, like, there isn't a thing that doesn't wake them up, so I'll put an enemy to sleep again and then try to, like, hit him with, like, a Firestone or something. That should also wake them up. Poison, however, will not wake an enemy up, and I'll show that too. So one thing that is good that Anna can do is she can put something to sleep and then poison it. Or I'm sorry, poison it and then put it to sleep. Alright, so these are both put to sleep. One thing that will wake them up is damage, though. So for example, if Anna comes over here and throws poison, the damage from throw poison should wake this up. And there it goes. And there's also a follow-up attack. So the funny thing is here, if I Slumber Stab, it should wake him up. So let's see. Let's test this. Yeah. So you can see here like a big downside of sleep, where if you trigger a follow-up attack with a melee, with any attack that puts an enemy to sleep, a follow-up attack will wake them up. So that's not the best thing. So you just have to be mindful of that when using sleep, to avoid follow-up attacks. Alright, so this enemy's asleep. We're going to hit him with a Firestone just to show this waking him up. It should, and it does. Alright, that's good. And then for Rudolph, we can just have him come over here, try to Slumber Shot this guy. So the main takeaways. Oh yeah, I'm gonna try to put that other guy to sleep too with Lionel if I can. I'll battle cry him just to show like the poison. Poison will not wake them up, interestingly enough. So if you put poison on an enemy and then put them to sleep, it'll still deal some damage. It's not the most like optimal strategy, to be honest. There's better ways of dealing with things, but early game it can be okay to do this. All right, so we'll endless speech these. Hopefully the poison guy goes to sleep, and he doesn't, so that's unfortunate. But you can take my word for it. I did test it. I did test the poisoned enemies will not wake up. So, but any source of direct damage, like a hit or a magic spell, Firestone, any of the elemental stones, even follow-up attacks, all of these will wake enemies up, so you have to be very mindful of that. So when you put enemies to sleep, you want to be very careful to not hit them accidentally with AoE or to trigger follow-up attacks. And aside from that, sleep is just a decent shutdown condition that can disable enemies for a turn or two, buy you some time. The reason I say a turn or two, even though it's always 2 turns, is because if you accidentally wake them up, like, you know, then they're going to be only disabled for a turn. But, I mean, it is possible they don't get disabled at all. Like, you sleep them, and then they just get woken up by something stupid. But in general, things will be going to sleep for 2 turns or 3 turns on Yens with upgrade. And should you run sleep? And who's the best sleeper? Who's really good at sleeping? All right, so the best sleeper, I would say, is Lionel, because Endless Speech can be used at range. It can hit 5 targets. Even if the sleep misses, you very likely will silence them, which is also like just as good in a lot of cases. Like silencing most enemies prevents them from dealing big spike damage from like abilities, or just shuts down mages and healers. So I would say Lionel's is the best, and then Anna's is like the second best. The reason I don't like Yen's sleep is because he already has traps, which already waste turns and deal damage and can knock enemies off high ground. He also has ladders, so his traps and ladders are much better than his Slumber Strike. Now, you can use Slumber Strike in some instances, but it honestly doesn't really make too much sense if you just position him correctly and just spam traps the whole game. For Rudolph, he wants to be dealing damage, but putting something to sleep gives him some crowd control, so it can be decent to use on him. And then for Anna can sneak up. She can stealth and then sneak up behind like an enemy mage or an enemy healer and then put them to sleep, which is huge impact because it prevents the enemies, the enemy casters from contributing, nuking your dudes, or keeping their frontliners alive, which can create huge opportunities for your team to clean up a bunch of enemy physical and not have to worry about them catching heals. So it's pretty much good on all the characters that have it, and honestly, it's a pretty good condition. Yeah, there's really nothing wrong with it. You just have to be mindful of like avoiding, not hitting the things that are asleep, avoiding follow-up attacks. Another thing that isn't good with it, though, is tempt. If you're running a tempt-heavy comp, or even just tempt in general, you have to be very careful not to tempt enemies that are awake, because they will very likely attack another enemy that you put to sleep if it's nearby, and if it's also not tempted. So you have to be mindful of stuff like that. You have to be mindful of like green AI smacking things. So I like my favorite conditions are like silence, immobilize, blind, paralyze. I think paralyze is basically just way better than sleep, but the only character who has a good chance of paralyzing is Azana. So she's kind of like a shutdown mage, because paralyze just straight up disables something for 2 turns. You can just go to town and whack it and just finish it off whenever you feel like it. So there's no downside to paralyze. So sleep is good, and it's more available because it's on 4 characters. But it's not as good of a shutdown as like paralyze. But obviously it's more accessible. You can get it on more units, so it's really good. I would say it's worth running. But yeah, that's it for sleep. Let me know if there's anything that I missed, or if you run any interesting tactics with sleep. I'm sure there's some interesting, like, actually now that I'm thinking about it, it'd be kind of funny to run all 4 of these and just have like try to put everything to sleep the whole game. That'd be like a funny video. But yeah, if you like this type of content, definitely subscribe to the channel and like the video. We just hit 1K subs, so the hype is real. I am going to be doing Fire Emblem 3 Hopes tutorials when that ships, but I'm still going to be doing a ton of triangle strategy content. I'm finishing up like the conditions guides, and then I might do a conditions tier list, which seems weird, but just for fun I might do that. And then I'm also doing like team comps and then build videos still, where I like come up with builds, or at least like optimal ways of using a character that are interesting. So like the Maxwell high jump build. So people who run Maxwell a lot are just like, yeah, you use high jump a lot. But if you don't like know how to use Maxwell, or you don't understand how to set up high jumps, like I think it's useful for like a player who hasn't used Maxwell yet. So that's really who those videos are for. Or even people who do use Maxwell, but maybe they play him in a different way, and then this high jump build is like, oh, you can use him this way. And the same thing with like the Roland Flash of Steel build, the Piccoletta decoy build. I mean, the Piccoletta decoy build is like her default way of operating, but it's still useful to see it in action and to like understand why Piccoletta is good. The reason why she's good is she has 6 range and can use AoE fire magic of any element every turn for 0 TP. Yes, it costs money, but with the 20k per 2-minute farm, it is nothing. You can just, she's like a damage carry. She's a damage carry that can make decoys. She doesn't even need a battery. And then if you run a battery, then you can just spam decoys, or you can spam spells, basically. But most mages have 4 range with their abilities, and the only exception is like Sunfall and Glacial Moon and some like specific abilities. But she has passive 6 range, which is crazy. And she's an evasion tank with good durability, unlike mages. So honestly, she's a very good unit. She might even be S tier if used correctly. I'm going to have to test running like the best stones on her and then do damage comparisons. But the fact that she has all these different toolkits, or all these different tools, is huge. Her copycat skill, I think people sleep on this, but if you actually use it correctly, you can basically put spells on her. So like one way to think about her kit is she can create decoys, she can always spam stones, and she can copycat for free. So if there's an enemy healer, she can become a healer. If there's an enemy melee unit with like a really interesting ability, like if we look at some of these abilities like Delaying Thrust, it does decent damage and hits 3 horizontal squares and delays. Like she can steal that. And like honestly, I think people don't understand how to use Piccoletta, and I don't even understand fully yet, so I need to like playtest more. But I think the copycat thing actually opens up her kit to be more versatile than it seems, and to bring more to the table than it seems. And the reason they limited her kit is because of the item spam, the decoy spam, and the fact that she can steal any skill, including boss skills. So if there's like a unique, crazy boss skill, she can just steal it and then use it. And there's a boss, like I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's a chapter where there's a boss that can instantly kill or deal like absurd damage to everything that has 3 TP or more, and you can steal that on Piccoletta. So she can just straight up do ridiculous crap like that. But you could steal like a fire spell from an enemy mage, and then now she's a fire mage. Like this is the type of thing she can do. So I'm curious to see how well she does, like used optimally. But I would say she's at least A tier. I know some people give me pushback on that, but she can spam AoE spells at 6 range. Any element. And she can single target spike with large thunderstones for big damage at range as well. So, but it just she can do it without a battery. It just costs money, so it's crazy. All right, so yeah, that's it for this one. Thanks for checking us out.